Welcome, everyone. We are in for a historical treat today. My name is Charlene Garcia Sims, and I'm the Genealogy and Special Collections Librarian here at Pueblo City County Library District. We're at Rawlings right now. And I also have one of our staff members here, Megan Wilbar, who is assisting us with the technology. Thank you, Megan. I have Virginia Sanchez, author of Pleas and Petitions, Hispano Culture and Legislative Conflict in Territorial Colorado, with a focus on the impending insurrection in Conejos, Colorado Territory in 1862. Colorado Territory had been a territory for 1 year, and yet its Anglo population in Conejos and Costilla counties feared an insurrection like that of the 1847 Taos Massacre. This presentation explains the bias and conflict surrounding the important yet unknown events that took place during Colorado's early territorial period. These events include the Conejos land grant, Hispano petitions to return to New Mexico territory, taxation and legislation, and the impact of the Civil War and Indian Wars. And Virginia Sanchez is a historian, author, and independent scholar living in Colorado. Her latest book, which is Pleas and Petitions, Hispano Culture and Legislative Conflict in Territorial Colorado, was published by the University of Colorado Press in 2020. She is also a contributing author to Nación Genízara, Ethnogenesis, Place and Identity in New Mexico, published by the University of New Mexico Press in 2019. Her first book, one of my favorites, Forgotten Cuchareños of the Lower Valley, received the 2011 Miles History Award from History Colorado. Her articles have appeared in many historical and genealogical journals. So take it away, Virginia.
Hello, Charlene. I'm so happy to be here today. What I'm showing you on this screen is a map of Colorado. And you'll see that part of Nebraska, Utah, Kansas, and the territories of New Mexico were absorbed to create the territory of Colorado in 1861. Now, this area was Ute country, so the Ute Indians were at home here in this area. And so I want to acknowledge their presence in Colorado. The miners had arrived searching for gold in 1859. And once they established their claims, they found that they needed to create some codes or some of their own laws, claim laws. Now, this is important as we go further in this discussion, but they had established this area of present-day Colorado as the territory of Jefferson. Now, in this territory of Jefferson, they automatically included Costilla, Huérfano, and Conejos counties. So, in 1858, Miguel Antonio Otero was the territorial delegate to Congress from New Mexico. And the congressional leaders were trying to determine how to create Colorado. And basically, they wanted Colorado Territory to appear on the map of the United States in the center as a square. It's really a rectangle, but they said, yes, we want it as a square in the middle of the country. So now this is a map of New Mexico, and if in the top right portion, you'll see the little notch area that we're talking about for Conejos and Costilla counties. So Otero is talking to the congressional members, and he's saying, please don't move this part of New Mexico into Colorado. It'll displace 7,000 people. And he quoted from the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo saying, they shall be free to continue where they now reside. With no vote of the people, the congressional members automatically moved this top portion of this notch area of New Mexico into Colorado Territory. Now, today I'm going to discuss the impact of this annexation and the impact that it also had on the people in these lower counties of Colorado, Conejos, and Costilla counties. Elections were held in Conejos and Costilla counties. And then during this time, we have a lot of things happening here. We've got the period of 1861 to 1875 is the territorial period for Colorado. We have the miners entering in about 1859. Then we've got Fort Garland being established. We have the Santa Fe Trail going on. Santa Fe Trail actually began in 1821. and it was still going on in Colorado through the Trinidad area. At this point, 1 month after the creation of Colorado Territory, the U.S. goes into war, and it's the Civil War between the North and the South. Now, I mentioned the Ute Indians, so an agency is established in the Conejos area for the Ute Indians, and at this time we're finding that the government rations that are being provided to the Ute agency are insufficient, or they're moldy the food is moldy by the time they get to the Conejos area. So the Utes are a little disappointed, and they're growing hungry. The miners and the other settlers are taking up all of the available wildlife that's available, and so that's a big problem for the Utes. At this point, we have the Conejos and the Sangre de Cristo land grants that were issued in the 1840s, and those two areas of those two land grants are in the areas that we're discussing today. Elections were held, and in Conejos County, they elected Jose Victor Garcia. Garcia had been a legislator in the New Mexico Territorial Legislature in 1858, and he represented this area, which is the Notch area that we're talking about, that was absorbed into Colorado Territory. The voters of Costilla County had elected Jesus Maria Varela. So essentially, we've got two Hispanos. They're Spanish-speaking, and they're going to represent the two lower counties in the Colorado Territorial Legislature. Now, Huerfano County, as I mentioned, was part of Colorado at this time, and unfortunately, although the population of Huerfano County was predominantly Hispano, there were no Hispanos elected to represent them in the territorial legislature. So the rules of order for the legislature were very different for these two Hispano representatives. The Senate had adopted the rules from the miners who were creating the territory of Jefferson, and the House adopted the rules used by the Kansas Assembly. Now, a Spanish translation of these rules were badly needed by Garcia and Varela, because otherwise they would not know how to introduce a bill, how to do the preliminary discussions, and what the rules were in the House for these types of things. So Varela and Garcia asked for a translation of the rules of order. The response was, no, we cannot do that because we don't have any money in the treasury, which was true. Colorado was just established. However, even though it didn't have any money in the treasury, Governor Gilpin, who was selected to be the governor by President Lincoln, never made any appropriations or never requested any federal dollars for these types of incidental translations that would be needed by the Spanish-speaking representatives. This is very, very unfortunate, because without this, how were they to fully represent their constituents? So they were denied any money from the Treasury, and then all these bills get passed. So they also found that there was no availability of an interpreter for them. So again, this is a big deal, because how are they to understand what is going on? And early on, Colorado, the legislature had decided that it was going to be according to English common law. And now this is quite different than New Mexico's territorial legislature, which was a bilingual legislature. In other words, they conducted business in Spanish and English, and they had a full-time interpreter, and they had federal dollars to publish the statutes, the laws, in Spanish and in English. Now, Colorado did not make for any of those kinds of appropriations, and they were not ready when the two Hispanos appeared in the legislature. So part of the problems with the interpreters was, again, that they had not selected an interpreter or had one available for them. And many times the interpreters were misunderstanding what these two legislators were trying to do in enacting some or getting some bills introduced. For example, Garcia had introduced a bill to change the county seat from Guadalupe to Conejos. And I say Guadalupe in the French pronunciation because that was the way it was even spelled on maps at this time. So he's got a bill to change the name and the county seat from Guadalupe to Conejos. His bill passes and it goes to the Senate. Then Varela wants to change the county seat from Costilla to San Luis, and he'd like to change the county name from Costilla to San Miguel. Well, his interpreter had really botched up the bill. By the time it reached the Senate said, well, we don't understand this, and this is ridiculous. So they denied it. It came back to the House, and that's when they discovered that it was a problem of misinterpretation by the Anglo interpreter. Now, another example is in 1864, we had a Hispano senator, Juan Bautista Jaques, also Spanish-speaking, and in 1864 he's saying, I need a new interpreter. The present one is incompetent in the Spanish language, and he does not keep me posted on the proceedings. These are very important areas. And the senator from Gilpin County just came out and said, the Senate has the right to select its interpreter. Another Anglo was selected as the interpreter. So, what I'm trying to say is that these men who were representing Spanish-speaking people of the southern counties really had their hands tied. They couldn't select their own interpreter. Their bills were being mismanaged by interpreters who were incompetent and had no cultural knowledge of the southern counties. Now we're going to talk about some laws that were passed. So during this time that Garcia and Varela are trying to get an understanding of what they're supposed to do, what the rules are and everything, meanwhile, the Anglo legislature basically is passing 36 private acts, 8 memorials, 3 resolutions. Many civil and criminal codes are coming from Illinois. So what do they know about the criminal codes and the civil codes of the laws of Illinois? Many taxes were being passed. Now you have to remember that Southern Colorado, when it was part of New Mexico, was a barter society. So not much cash was available in this area. Now the people found that with these taxes being enacted, that they would have to convert their property and their livestock to cash in order to pay some taxes. Now, some could not do that. And it was when tax day came around, a lot of them were not able to pay taxes. And they were seen as not being patriots, and they were seen as just being unpatriotic. Their citizenship was questioned. Now, remember that these Hispanos in New Mexico had become citizens of the United States since the Treaty of Guadalupe in 1848. So they were full-fledged citizens, and only men at the time could vote. So men the age of 18 up were able to vote. Women were not able to vote at this time. But another tax that they enacted was a federal tax for the Civil War to help fund the Civil War. The road and highways tax was an important one that I need to discuss, because males between the ages of 18 and 50 had to pay a $5 tax annually. If they could not pay this tax, they would provide 2 days' labor on the roads. And if they were delinquent or they failed to work or refused to work, after 10 days, their property could be seized. So this was happening a lot with some of the taxes and the laws that they had enacted. The livestock could be impounded until the fines were paid, and the fines were 25 days for each day in violation. So it's very, very difficult for these people to, again, convert their livestock and property to cash and to pay these taxes. So they're seen as being unpatriotic, and meanwhile, they're losing their land and they're losing their livestock, which is a very sad thing, because they had to sell whatever they had in order to, and they had to sell it for cash. Now, remember, I said it was a barter society, so this is a new practice for them. Now, Garcia and Barella were unable to fully participate in the bill's discussions and whatnot. So this meant that through no fault of their own, there was a lack of equal representation in the legislature. Celestino Dominguez was highly sought after as an interpreter. Now, he arrived in Colorado Territory as mysteriously as he left. He had automatically, just on his own time, had taken the laws of the first session in 1861 and had translated them into Spanish. So, in other words, we're ready to publish them. All we need is some funds to do this. So, because he had he was fluent in several languages, English included, the Anglos saw him as a threat. He had clout with the Hispano people, and his request for publishing was also denied because the territory still did not have any funds in 1862. Celestino Dominguez is later elected to represent Conejos County. He only served one term, and we're going to talk about him a little bit later, but he chaired several committees, and he served on many other committees that no Hispano during the territorial period had ever done. As I mentioned, the statutes were ready to be published, and for too many years they were told, no, we don't have any money. So Varela and Garcia decided to take matters into their own hand. The governor wasn't able to help them. This is Governor Gilpin at the time, and by 1862, it's Governor Evans. So they had no support from their territorial delegates, and they submitted a letter to the United States Treasurer. This treasurer was named Whittlesey, and he was from Ohio. And I mention that because, as it turned out, he knew nothing of our history in the Southwest. He denies the request for federal funds to publish the statutes in Spanish because he says the custom of the government has been to encourage foreign-born citizens to acquire a knowledge of our own language, and hence in the territories, the laws have been printed in the English language except in New Mexico, where 9/10 of the people use their native tongue. Whittlesey, the United States Senator, failed to understand that these citizens of southern Colorado were not foreign-born. By this time, they were born in New Mexico territory, and they were citizens of the United States. Whittlesey also did not understand that they had been taken from the New Mexico territory and absorbed into Colorado when Colorado was created in 1861. So those are very important points that I want to mention about citizenship, cultural understanding, even historical understanding of people. So what happened is Whittlesey denied the request. And, I started asking myself, well, what happened to Governor Gilpin and what happened to Governor Evans? They could have gone back to the federal treasurer and said, we really need these funds. The request could have come from them. But like they had done with not engaging an interpreter for these legislators, the southern Colorado territory, the southern area of Colorado, the southern counties were forgotten. And that's an important point that I want to make with this. So after 2 years of being in Colorado territory, Otero's prediction had come true. He said to Congress back then, if you move these people into a new territory, they will petition to return. And they did. So they were impacted by the new order of things under the territory of Colorado. Things were different here. Everything was in English. There were no timely printing of the statutes in Spanish. So how were they supposed to understand what the tax money was going to be used for? In order to pay their taxes, they lost their land, they lost their livestock and personal property. Fines were imposed on them, and the road and taxes bill provided that they would do free labor if they couldn't pay. So these were all unequal, and it's a very sad time in history, I think. They were connected to New Mexico, and they wanted to return, and they also wanted their land to be returned to to New Mexico. Now, this land had to do with the Conejos and the Sangre de Cristo land grants. So during the Constitution, let me go back. The petitions were submitted, and they had the approval of the New Mexico territorial legislature. The legislature was supporting them, and their delegate to the Congress was supporting their petition to be returned with the land to New Mexico. And it got to Congress, but unfortunately the session ended before any final vote could be made. The following session was dealing with Reconstruction after the Civil War, and the issue was not taken up again. So by 1875, there's a Colorado State Constitutional Convention. And during this convention, each county was able to send delegates. In Conejos and Costilla counties, they were not able to send a Hispano delegate to represent them. They were Anglo. Now, I credit Las Animas County for sending 3 delegates to that convention. These delegates were Casimiro Varela, Agapito Abeta, and Jesus Maria Garcia. Celestino Gomez served as their translator during the Constitutional Convention. Now, Casimiro Varela had submitted the bill to provide a version of the state constitution in Spanish, and then the bill was amended so that it would also provide it in German. So Celestino Dominguez was also one of the proofreaders of the Spanish version of the state constitution. But an important effort that I want to talk about here is even today, Casimiro Varela gets the credit for his historic bill to get the state constitution published in Spanish. However, it was the combined effort of the earlier Hispano territorial representatives who made this really possible. Their requests to the legislature for translation of the House and the Senate rules, and for translations of the statutes, the laws, were important. The people needed to know what was being done and how these laws were changing their lives. So here I introduce the territorial representatives throughout the period 1861 to 1875. They are Felipe de Jesus Baca, Las Animas County; Jesus Maria Garcia, Las Animas County; Casimiro Varela, the same county; Jose Celestino Valdez, Conejos; Victor Garcia, you see him there; Jose Anastasio de Jesus Valdez is out of Huérfano County. He is one of 2 lawyers who were approved to the Colorado Bar, only 2 during the territorial period. So he is one of those 2. Mariano Sisto Laragoite actually went back and forth from Colorado Territory to New Mexico Territory. So that's an interesting piece of history that I also include in my book in the biography section. Then there's Francisco Sanchez and Pedro Rafael Trujillo. Now, these men whom I named are the ones that we only have photos for. The ones that are in the box here are also territorial representatives, but we have no historical photos of these men. and very few historical documents of their lives. So if any listeners out there are descendants of these representatives, I would love to hear from you. And with that, I'll just take it back to Charlene. And this is how you can get a copy of the book.
Okay, thank you. And this is the book again, and it is a wonderful book. I just love it. It's really funny because one set of my grandparents ended up in Colorado, and one set ended up in New Mexico because of this legislation. And they didn't care. They didn't consider it a border. They just went back and forth, and it was as if it was New Mexico.
Right.
And
right. They continued with their own traditions and customs and operated the same way they did in New Mexico.
For the longest time, I wondered why did this happen? And now we know, Virginia. Thank you for letting us know why. And I have some questions for you. How long did your research take?
Oh, it took a long time. By the time you're taking notes, and by the time you go back to those notes, and then you find that you have to find out other information, it takes a lot of reading too. You need to know and understand the history quite well before you start to write about it. And as you know, Charlene, my book has a lot of footnotes. Number of years, I can say many. I don't want to say 10, 20, but it's close, let me tell you. And the impact of the 7,000 people that were displaced in place into Colorado Territory, their lives totally changed. And so did the lives of their descendants. Throughout this territorial period and even into the statehood period, their citizenship was always questioned. Are they really citizens of the United States, or are they Mexican nationals? So, it's sad that had to happen.
But you also mentioned that they didn't understand the language, so they didn't understand the laws. So a lot of loss of land happened here, and so they went from being owners to working for hourly wages.
Right. And then because they were Spanish speakers, they were criticized for it. No, you're American citizens, speak American. And no, that's not it. We've been speaking Spanish for 400 years. And we've been on this continent longer than the English settlers. So for people to really want us to forget our language and our heritage and our traditions and our religion is wrong.
Well, especially when in the treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, they said that we could keep the language, right?
Right.
The language and the religion
and the land and the land.
There's a lot more to talking about the land. So you need to write another book to explain that portion, because it was so unfair. And this is for some of our ancestors who were pretty wealthy turned pretty poor.
Mm-hmm.
I remember in doing my genealogy, some of these people had land, they had sheep, and when this happened, they lost it.
Yes.
And they had to move.
And during this period, you have in 1862, we've got the Homestead Act. So it opened up the territory for settlers to come in. And because these settlers from the Conejos land grant, the Conejos was not yet confirmed by Congress, so they couldn't protect their land. Newcomers were coming in and they were patenting that land. And with the Sangre de Cristo, there was an 1861 land conveyance law in Colorado Territory that said what it is today. What's your full name? What's the actual legal address of the property? Blah, blah, blah. Well, Carlos Bobien of the Sangre de Cristo land grant had issued deeds to his settlers so that they could keep the land on the Sangre de Cristo land grant. He died, and unfortunately, his deeds did not conform to the territorial land conveyance law. So the deeds were null null and ineffective. And we find that during this time, a lot of Hispanos are moving east over the Sangre de Cristos into Huerfano County. So we have a lot of migration, a big migration going there.
Yeah, I found that in a lot of my great grandfather's siblings, they moved to Gardner and to Red Wing, and I always wondered, why, and this was why. And I always think of it was like in a race, they weren't in the same starting point.
Right.
They were like one or two generations
Absolutely.
back, and we're still catching up. We've made progress, but people wonder, well, why? Why is this? Why are your economics the way they are? Well, because we were pushed back. We were pushed back. We were not in the same starting point of the race. Like I said, it seems like we were pushed back one or two generations, and we're still trying to catch up. So
it's an important history that I think we need to understand and talk about.
It is, and I love it. So I hope more and more people, read your book to understand.
With regard to the petitions to return to New Mexico, Colorado delegates to Congress had worked against it because they needed the Hispano population in order to for statehood. You had to have 60,000 citizens in your state, in your territory, before you became a state. So if they lost these 7,000 plus by this time, Hispanos, they wouldn't have had enough
to become a state. Yeah. Thank you so much. And I hope a lot of people, continue reading your book. Did you run into any roadblocks in getting the book published?
No, I worked, I spent a lot of time on my cover letter, and I spent a lot of time on my proposal. And it was the history. I made sure that it was new information that I was presenting, rather than the same old, these people came on, they settled along the Conejos and the Costilla rivers. So I presented a lot of new information, and I think that really helped.
Okay, and I've always loved your footnotes. They're amazing. I buy your book for the text, and I buy it for the footnotes.
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to make sure that people would believe what I'm saying.
I know. Okay. And you got it published by Colorado Press, right? Colorado University Press. Yeah, that's pretty good publishing company to get it published by. So I'm so glad you got it done. And what would you recommend to writers who want to have their historical nonfiction published?
Read a lot. Know what you're going to be talking about. If you're talking about your family members, you need to understand, make a timeline so that you understand what was happening in American history during that time, what was happening in the Southwest at that time, what was happening between different groups. As I mentioned, the Santa Fe Trail was going on during this period that I wrote about. The Civil War was being fought. The Indian Wars were being fought. The youths were going hungry. Many Indian nations were going hungry during this Indian Wars era. And so you have to kind of understand what was going on during the period of your ancestors. And I think that helps us understand that when we look at the census records and find that they were what their occupations were. For example, if they were a freighter and they're in Las Animas County and they're making a lot of money freighting, that they probably freighted along the Santa Fe Trail. And that was all the way to Missouri. Now, if their income is very low and they were freighters or haulers, as you might call them, wagon haulers, then maybe they just worked locally transporting goods or delivering goods. So that's important to kind of understand what the economy was like at that time.
And there was so much going on, like you said, the Santa Fe Trail, the Civil War, and what happened just because the Civil War, in the Civil War, slavery was abolished. There were so many more problems that were presented, right after with the Black. So there's just so much to learn about history. And is there anything else that you would like to add?
You know, if we go back and see that photo of the Hispano representatives who were in the early territorial period, I have a sense of pride with that. You know, I am just very honored to have them represent our people, and I also feel a lot of pain because of all of the things that they went through in the legislature and what their constituents had to go through with regard to all of the new laws passed and the differences of opinions, I guess I'll say.
I mean, I can't imagine going to a place where I speak, Spanish, and they're talking in English and they're passing these laws in English. I mean,
Yeah,
how
yeah.
unfair! How unfair is that?
Yeah, the governor knew they were coming to the legislature. You know, he could have arranged for an interpreter. He could have arranged for territorial or federal funds for the incidental printing that would be needed. Very sad, very sad. And then
Said
we
that-
find Governor Gilpin purchasing the Sangre de Cristo land grant. So we know where his mind was at.
And you said that the one interpreter came in as fast as he left. How did he leave? Did they fire him? Did they get rid of him?
Well, as I mentioned, I think that some Anglos were pretty fearful of him because he had this clout with the Southern Colorado people, and he also had business clout in Denver. So we don't know what happened to him, and that disturbs me. That it does. He was not born in Conejos. He represented Conejos. He was Spanish born, and he was highly educated from the University of Barcelona. And I think there was just some threat there, but I cannot say that there was any. I don't know that anything malicious happened to him, but I do fear that because there was a lot of violence during this time.
Does he disappear from
All
the face
records,
of the earth?
he just disappears.
That's a mystery we need to solve.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. I mean, this is such an exciting book. I cannot tell you. I just kept reading it every night. I just love it. And this gentleman here, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, right here. He is my great grandmother's godfather, my great grandmother,
nice.
Nemesio Cordova, and his name, he was
Is that Trujillo?
Pablo or Pedro?
Jose Rafael?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. He was my great grandmother's godfather. They were probably related, I'm sure, through the mother. But I love that picture, and I provided that picture to you. And
yes, I did. And I am forever grateful.
So lucky, to have it in my hands. So, but anyway. Okay. So thank you, and please, everybody. And is this at Barnes and Nobles also or not? I can't remember what you told me.
You can request it if it's not already at Barnes and Noble. It is available through online booksellers, and ebooks are available. And ebooks are available through the University of Colorado Press.com.
So anyway, okay. Well, so thank you, and
Charlene, thank you. I appreciate being on your program.
And thank you, everybody, for joining in, and please continue checking our website to see what other programs are coming in. We're